Hey folks, Baz here, coming on tonight to do the 6 o'clock presentation. We'll obviously give a couple of minutes for people to jump on if they're going to listen to us tonight. The subject is around problem solving and decision making, because I thought it was one of those things that quite important really in terms of the sorts of dilemmas we get ourselves in around those subjects. So I thought it would be something that would be worthwhile. In accordance with the normal Happiness Co tradition, if you like, say my gratitudes. I just noticed Peter's jumped in. Lovely to see you, Peter. Thanks for joining us. My gratitudes for today, for really feeling a bit balanced again. It's been a week or so now on the drugs, and really finding that I'm starting to get a nice balance around it, and that the emotions are really nice and even. So I'm really grateful for that. Still got a little bit of fatigue. It seems to be every second day I need to have a nana nap, but really going well with that, and very fortunate, I guess, very grateful for the fact that if I do need to, I can go and have an hour or so kip. So very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for the fact that I was able to jump in and help out at late notice for tonight's presentation. I was able to whip this presentation up nice and quick so that we could make it tonight. So very grateful for that. And my last gratitude is the real genuine friends that I'm making through Happiness Co, and really enjoying the fact that we have a common share, if you like. And I've just got one further gratitude tonight, in that my little mate Connor in Queensland saw the oncologist this afternoon, and at this early point anyway, he won't have to go back in for brain surgery on the tumour. So very grateful for that. And I noticed Lee's just joined us, and I hope everything's going really well for the beautiful Christy, and I hope everything is fantastic. So we've got a few people on. Hello, Dana, darling. I've got my camera hooked up using Bluetack. So if at some point during this presentation it comes crashing down, well, we'll just have to deal with it. So let's talk about decision making, problem solving, and why I thought it would be a good subject to talk about tonight. The main reason is that we can often get into a bit of a bind in regards to problem solving or decision making. And it's this presentation, I used to give a similar presentation when I was in the emergency services, and it was around making decisions in an emergency situation where it was a crisis situation. You needed to make very solid decisions, or very solid decisions in quick time. But when Priya asked me to think of something to present tonight, I thought there was still some validity in the subject, because from my own personal experience, early on, particularly through my early mental health problems, the whole decision-making process for me became very difficult. And I just thought it would be nice to spend some time this evening looking at that particular subject. So let's have a look at it. Many years ago, I was looking at starting up a consultancy business. I'd finished my master's. I was pretty keen to get into consulting, particularly around the areas of organisational development, leadership, crisis communications, those sort of things. But I just couldn't take that step. I had a young family, I had a mortgage obviously, and so there were all these things holding me back from making that decision. I remember talking to a friend of mine who said to me, "Baz, you don't seem to be yourself. You seem to be a little bit stressed. What's up?" I said, "Well, I need to make this decision. It's a really important decision, and I just don't know which way to go." And in a really calm, kind of voice said, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what the problem is. All you have to do is to make a decision. And I was pretty pissed off when she said it, I've got to tell you. And I kind of thought, yeah, well, I know I've got to make a decision, but which one? And she said, either of them. And I thought about it, got a little bit angrier, to be honest. I was driving home and thinking about what she said, and really what she was saying was it actually doesn't matter what decision you make. You can always make another one. If you've made the wrong decision, you can modify it, or you can change it, or you can just make another decision. And Mark spoke about this in one of the earlier presentations on Happiness Aid, that a non-decision, is the worst decision you can make, because it takes us no closer to the solution and no further away from the problem. And so it's really important that we're really confident around our decision-making and problem-solving skills. So I thought we would look at that from a process tonight, and look at what we could do to improve our skills. Like I always do, I'm not suggesting I'm the guru in this. What I'd like for you to do is to take this information. If it sits well with you, that's fine. If it doesn't, and that's fine as well. So it's really around just sharing some of my experiences and seeing, I guess, whether they resonate with any of you. So they say that we make around 35,000 decisions a day. And most of these are what they call those remotely conscious decisions. They're the ones that we kind of make probably without too much thought. So assuming you sleep around 7 hours a day, that's about 2,000 decisions an hour that we make every single day. That equates to about one decision every 2 seconds. So we're actually pretty good at decision making. And the really interesting part about it is we can do this like in milliseconds. The process of decision making is inherent in us. It's how we've survived, and what we've done is complicated it to the point where we can't make those decisions. So I want to take you through the 7 steps, if you like, of the decision making process. And I don't know what it is with leadership things, or there's always 7 steps. 7 traits of highly effective people. We've got 7 steps to the decision-making process. I have no idea why it's 7. I was actually going to make it 6 just to get away from the 7, but I couldn't take one of them out. So the first step in the problem-solving equation or process is to actually identify the problem that you need to solve, or the question that you need to answer. Now, you'll be sitting there going, well, duh, I mean, that's pretty obvious, that's what I need to do. But it's actually one of the hardest things for us to do, is to identify what the real problem is. What is the question you need the answer to? What is it that we're trying to solve? And often we can get into what's called a symptomatic or fundamental problem-solving loop. So by that I mean, let's say I go down to the stables every morning. As I walk past the rose bush, I get a little scratch on my arm. I get down the stables, I go, oh, it's bleeding, I'll put a Band-Aid on it. Good job, solved the problem, bleeding stopped. Next morning I get up to go to the horses, I walk down past the rose bush, scratch my arm again, get down there, go, oh, it's bleeding, and I'll put another Band-Aid on it. And I can continue to do this ad infinitum, it will never stop. That's symptomatic problem solving. The symptom is simply the bleeding, and I'm going to put a Band-Aid on it. Fundamental problem solving is when we identify the cause of it. So in this case, it would be the rose bushes hanging over the path. I'd get out the secateurs and I'd cut them. That's fundamental problem solving as opposed to symptomatic problem solving. And very often we do the former. We do this symptomatic problem solving. So first part of the process, yes, we've got to identify the problem, and hopefully it's the fundamental problem. We've got to gather relevant information, and in doing this we've got to be sure that it's relevant and factual. So it's at this point that the whole thinking brain feeling brain kind of come into conflict a little bit here. Is it really relevant? Is it really factual? Is this just how I'm feeling? Is this a story that I've created? So we're going to be really careful that the information that we're gathering is actually factual and relevant to the problem that we're trying to solve. The next step in the process, actually I want to be like Julie now. Now the next step in the process, write this down. Identify the alternatives. This is where a lot of people go wrong during the process. So we've identified the problem, we're gathering information, and we get to the alternatives, and that's almost at this point where we start to make decisions, and that's wrong. Because if you do that, you're not fully exploring all of the alternatives, and you're missing out an important step. So we identify the alternatives. What are the different options available to us? What could we do with this information to solve that problem? And only then, once we've got some alternatives, we weigh that evidence up. We go, okay, how should we deal with this? If I do this, this could happen. If I do that, that could happen. And again, we're talking evidence here. We're not talking feelings. We're talking evidence. So all these parts of the process are the thinking brain, not the feeling brain. And this is where decision making for us can sometimes become blurred. So we've weighed the evidence, we've looked at what a particular good course of action is, and we're going to choose the alternative. We're going to choose from those alternatives, take the action necessary, and then at the end of that we can review the decision to see if it was the right one. And if it's not, then we can modify it, or we can in fact make another decision. So let's walk through that as an example. We're walking down the streets late at night. Up in front of you, 5 men, looking pretty rough. 5 men on the street in front of you. So we've got to identify the problem. Well, the reality is there may actually be no problem. It's just 5 happy-go-lucky chaps out at night. There may be no issue at all. So let's keep on looking. Let's gather some information. There is 5 of them. They're wearing insignias on what look like leather jackets, standing around bikes. They look tough. So at this stage, you may not have a problem at all. Might be a risk, might be a threat, but is there actually a problem? So we continue to gather evidence, we continue to gather facts. So let's now say our 5 men are wearing insignias on their leather jackets, they're standing by their bikes, they look menacing, and they're carrying baseball bats. So I think now we've probably identified the problem, or at least the threat of a risk of a problem. So now we can start looking at alternatives. So one alternative would be to simply walk back from where we came, or a simple alternative would be to continue walking and take a chance, walk through the 5 guys wearing the insignias on their leather jackets carrying baseball bats. You're getting the point. So now we need to weigh the evidence. What is it that will decide which course of action that we'll take? And for this simple example, option 1 is we will not get hurt if we turn around and walk the other way. Option 2 is there's a risk, because we don't want to stereotype guys with bikes, but there's a risk that we might get beat up if we proceed through the group. But what happens if by turning around it means you'll be late for your date, and you know she hates to be kept waiting? So this is my date, so wife. So now the analysis is one of, well, I could get beat up by the gentleman with the bikes, or I could risk the wrath of my wife. So for me right now, I'd be more prepared to take on the bikies than Linda. So what we're doing is a series of analysis, is a series of questions to ourselves to identify the best course of action. So at this point, we're going to go, no, we're going to turn around. It's safer. I'm going to be late, but I'll be able to explain that to the wife or the girlfriend, and that's the action you take. So through this part, it is all the thinking brain. The problem is this is where, when we look at the alternatives, that the feeling brain can often come in and get involved in that process. And what happens is you end up with this kind of dialogue between the two an argument, if you like, around what is actually the best course of action to solve this problem. The feeling brain kind of says, whoa, hang on a minute, whoa, I haven't been involved in this process. I need to say this, I've got a stake in this. And very often we'll convince the thinking brain that there is another course of action that could be taken. And so really important that in these big decisions we stick to facts, we stick to evidence. Don't listen to those stories in the heads, because often they don't serve us very well. And one thing we do know is that at that point, the feeling brain cannot be reasoned with. We've all been in that situation. So we take the action, we walk back the other way, we turn around nonchalantly, we do that kind of quick little walk where you're wanting to walk quick but you don't want anyone to notice, so that little kind of waddle, and you head off. And the good thing about it is you review it, you turn around, the bikies aren't following you, so at least you're not going to get beat up from the bikies. The girlfriend, wife, well, that could still be another issue still to come. The interesting thing is that all that can happen in literally less than a couple of seconds. So when we're confronted with these sorts of decisions, our limbic system kicks in. So that's located just around the cerebral cortex, and it controls those behaviours which are essential to our self-preservation, the feeding, all of those things that keep us alive. So if we've got this thing happening for us, this limbic system happening for us, why is it that at times we can't make decisions? What happens in our head that overrides that limbic system? What happens in our minds that stops us from making good decisions or decisions at all? So when I used to give this this presentation or similar presentation to emergency service people, I used to carry an 8-ball, the ones that make those decisions for you, and a book of answers. Some people use tarot cards. There's a whole heap of different kind of ways that people, a flip of a coin even, where people will make decisions based on those things. But we've already seen there's a better way. Those 7 steps are a better way. But even so, we can get into the position where we won't or can't make decisions. And I want to look at some of those. The first is not having good decision-making techniques, not being able to identify the problem properly, falling for the symptomatic problems rather than the fundamental problems. So kind of lock in those 7 points, and I'll talk a little bit later on how we can indoctrinate that into our thinking. Sometimes we don't make decisions because of a lack of confidence. There's the story in your head. I don't trust myself to make those kind of decisions. I have a history. I always make shit decisions. And so when we think like that, then we run that risk of paralysing ourselves to make further decisions. Sometimes we just have a lack of information. And the key to this is the information real? Is it factual? Or is it a story in our head? Is it a perception? Really important that the information that we're dealing with to help us solve these problems is in fact real. Sometimes you can have too much information, and certainly for very complex problems or very complex situations, there is just way too much information. And it's often referred to as analysis paralysis, where you're just getting all this information coming in and you really can't deal with it. It's just too much information to deal with. And if we're not feeling on top of ourselves personally, if we're not in a good headspace, that same feeling can happen with even less information. So really, really important that we attack this from a clear headspace. Sometimes we don't make decisions because we simply don't want to disagree with other members. So it could be family members, it might be in a work situation, your peers, not wanting to be the dissenting voice through that decision-making process. So we've got to be really aware of where we're sitting with this. Are we comfortable with the decision? And they are all part of that alternatives that we talked about in those seven steps. Sometimes, sorry, my computer's just gone down, which is going to make it very interesting. Sometimes the problem or the decision is so large that we actually need to break it down into smaller bits. And that's a really good technique. I've often used the expression, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And problem solving is very, very similar to that, in that if you need to break it down, you are better off into making it into a number of smaller problems, identifying those individually, and kind of eat those, if you like, one bite at a time. What will also stop us is the level of responsibility and the consequences of our decisions. And this makes a lot of sense. If the decision itself is going to potentially cause us some pain, if it's literally a life or death decision. I remember sitting talking with one of my colleagues many, many years ago when I was in the emergency services. There was a large cyclone bearing down the coast, and the old Swiss cheese theory was happening. It was happening at a time where we were looking at a super tide, and the wind was coming from a particular direction. And if all those things lined up together, this town literally would have been wiped out. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was talking to my colleague, and we were doing that alternatives. We were bouncing around each other. So what if we do this? What would be the pros and cons of this? What alternatives do we have? And I remember him saying to me, and excuse the language, he said to me, Baz, if we fuck this up, people will die. And so the consequences of that particular decision was massive. And as it turned out, the decision was to do nothing for 3 hours, to see whether the tides, the winds, the cyclone track did actually start to do that, and that would give us a little bit of time to make another decision. But we still had to make a decision. So often when the gravity of the situation, and it doesn't have to be as bad as a cyclone, it can be, leaving your job, leaving a relationship. It could be a whole number of things which have very, very large consequences, and sometimes that will stop us making those decisions. There's always the fear of making a mistake or making the wrong decision. And I think from a personal perspective, this is often born around the stories that we had in our head. If we think, if we have a poor sense of self-worth, we're going to be very fearful about making poor decisions, because that's what we do. We're not good enough. We don't think we're good enough. And so all of those things lead us to not making a decision, or in fact making a wrong decision. But if you do, just make another one. Like Mark said this, and it's so true. Not making a decision is the worst decision you can make. Another thing that will stop or hinder us is knowing that if I make this decision, the next step is the unknown. I don't know what will happen after this. We see this with people who are unhappy in a relationship. They don't want to make the decision to leave or separate. And the fear is, but if I do, what's next? What's the next step in the process? And so all of these things kind of start messing around with our head and interfering with those very logical 7 steps that I spoke about earlier. And particularly within the realm of mental health, it's often very difficult to be able to compartmentalize this and really understand the facts, because we've got all these stories going around in our head. If we're emotionally attached to a certain outcome that's not the logical choice, that can also prevent us. Again, the stories in our head. Probably a bad example, but it's that one where the husband says, "Where do you want to go for holidays?" And the wife kind of goes, "Oh, I'd really like to go down south," but knows that the kids and hubby wants to go north, so we'll make the decision to consent to the greater good, rather than actually what they particularly want. And the really scary part is that the feeling brain can actually convince the thinking brain to some point of that an illogical thought is logical. We've all had experience, I'm sure, where we start listening to the feeling brain and going, well, I am terrible, I am hopeless, I don't have any skills. And suddenly that becomes our self-talk and we believe it. Mark Manson wrote those couple of books. The latest is Everything is Fucked. And in that book he says often the feeling brain is the one driving the clown car, as he calls it, not the thinking brain. And so we've really got to make sure we're clear in our mind who's driving this car. So there's opportunity costs in making a decision as well. So sometimes we continue to do things, we continue not to make decisions because there's actually a payoff for that. My old mate Dr. Phil often says on his show, well, how's that working for you? You know, he says you must be getting some sort of payoff to continue with that decision or to continue not to make a decision. And so understanding what that payoff is really important, and sometimes that takes some real soul searching to do. The one that I wanted to touch on also was around where there's a conflict of our personal values, that can often stop us making a decision. And my view on this is good. I've been in situations where I've had to make organisational decisions that would have gone against my personal values. And I think what we have to do in those cases is be very clear around what the problem is, identify those things. For me, values are non-negotiable. For me, there is no way that you can justify going against your values. Now, I've been lucky in the case that I've had CEOs that have been prepared to listen to me and go, yep, okay, there is an alternative, we will go that way, and I haven't felt like I've had to forego my values through the process. But it is certainly something that will affect the decision-making or problem-solving process. For me, I would rather, and in fact I would resign from an organisation rather than compromise my values. We're also very keen not to create winners and losers, and often in a partnership, in a relationship, it's those social constructs that play with our feeling brain, and it affects us and it makes us choose potentially the wrong problem. So that, say for my example, I have this unhealthy need to be loved, so I would be predisposed to potentially making decisions that would not cause people to dislike me or not love me. So even if they're the wrong decisions for me, because of that predisposition that I have, I may be swayed that way. So we've got to be really clear in our minds about our true selves, our true story, and understanding ourselves. And I think this is where the happiness code comes in. We don't just address the fact of being unhappy and say, I'll take a pill. That's not looking at the underlying cause. And the happiness code is really good about going, all right, you're unhappy. What's the cause of that? Let's unpack that. Let's really understand. And until we do that, it's not just for problem solving or decision making, it's about everything in our life. It's really understanding what those drivers are. So, as Julian says, and I'm going to use it again, so write this down, awareness precedes change. We've got to go through what our inhibiting factors are, have a look at ourselves and see which one of those are our go-to excuses for not making decisions. And it may not be the same one every time, but I'm guessing there's probably 1, 2 or 3 things that happen within ourselves that we go, oh, I don't make that decision because of X. And we've got to understand what those blockers are. We've got to begin to nullify them through this process so that we can factually go through those 7 steps. as I said before, you know, when I was going through my breakdown, the thing that terrified me the most was my inability to problem solve, my inability to be able to function to those steps that I've known really, really well for so long. But because of all the stories in my head, I was momentarily unable to function and undertake those steps to make clear decisions, to understand the process. And I mention this because there will be times for all of us when we go through our lives when just cognitively it's bloody hard to go through those 7 steps. The stories in our head outweigh the fact and the logic, and they take us to a place where we're actually incapable of making a decision. So I started thinking about that. Well, how does that occur? So people like surgeons, Defence Force personnel, emergency service people, people in A&E, how are they able to make such difficult decisions under such pressured environments? And it got me thinking. The first thing is they have an absolute 100% belief in themselves. No room for any self-doubt. So you can imagine a surgeon making that first drill in your skull for open brain surgery, and he's going, I'm not really sure if I can do this. I don't want him operating. Like, you've got to have that unwavering belief that you can do this. Same with a firefighter or emergency service personnel. When they're cutting someone out of a car, they know exactly what needs to be done and when, and the fact that it needs to be done quickly and methodically. So where does this self-belief come from? Why is that surgeon or that fire officer or that emergency service, why are they so sure of the fact that, so self-confident? And you might say they're arrogant, but certainly not the case. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think that they're not born with this particular superpower. It's a learned skill. And in all of the people that I've spoken about, all of those professions, pilots, the whole box and dice, all of those professions where they need to make critical decisions quickly come from 2 main factors, in my opinion. The first is knowledge, training and procedures. Every single one of those professions that are required to make those pressure decisions have what's called standing operating procedures. Our defence forces have them, our emergency services have them. They're called SOPs. And these SOPs are the manual, if you like, for what needs to be done, by whom, at what time, in what order, etc. Now, clearly, the last thing you want to see is your surgeon as he's about to put the Ryobi reciprocal saw on your head reading through the procedures manual. I don't think that would fill us with confidence. But he's learnt that. They've learnt that manual inside out. They know it frontwards, backwards. They've probably translated it from Mandarin. They know it inherently. And the second reason these people can make these high-powered decisions under those critical environments is not only do they have complete faith in themselves, they have complete faith in others, in their team. So when the surgeon cuts, through the skin or through the skull or whatever it is, they know that there will be a nurse with a suction pump ready to suck the blood away to give them a clear path. They don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about blood pressure and vitals because they've got an anaesthetist on the team whose job it is to do that. And they have complete faith in that person's capacity to do that. And so I can kind of feel this, kind of pushback almost that says, yeah, but all these people are amazing, they're extraordinary people, and they are, but these are behaviours that they've learned. One of the behaviours that I need to learn is that now that my computer's frozen, I could be in a bit of a problem. So let me just see if I can unfreeze it. Why would it do that? Gosh. Okay, so I'm going to have to do this the hard way. So those people have these unwavering support. They have this ability to get on and do the job. So just let me catch up, and I apologise for this. So imagine if we were like the surgeon, like the emergency management person, and that we had our own set of standing operating procedures that we knew backwards, that address all the little stories in our head and give us that confidence, give us that faith that when something comes up, when that limiting belief comes up, it pops up, we don't give into it. We go, no, that's not the case. I have complete faith in my capacity and my ability to do this. And not only do I have complete faith and capacity in my ability to make these decisions, I know that I've got a team of people that are with me. I've got a team of people, call it Happiness Co, who are there to support me in that process of making those kind of life decisions. So when we're feeling paralysed to make a decision or feeling capable of problem solving, let's examine what those limiting beliefs are. What story are we telling ourselves which stops us moving forward? As I said, very likely it's the same story. So I guess my take-home message tonight is, why don't we develop our own SOPs, our own standing operating procedures that allow us to be like the surgeon, like the pilot, like the soldier, who operate within that doctrine, knowing that they have complete faith in their capacity to do that particular job, to make that particular decision. Is it hard? Absolutely, without a doubt. Can I do it? Interestingly, and I've kind of not worked through this, I used to be able to do it in a professional capacity. So as the state crisis director, yeah, I could do that level of problem solving. I did have complete faith in my ability. I realised later I'm pretty crap at it at a personal level, but I'm certainly working on it. But is it worth it? Absolutely, because it gives us the freedom to make those decisions. And I just want to finish off by kind of saying, the more that we work on our self-love, the more we can control the stories in our heads, rather than being driven by those stories. The more we lean into love, away from fear, the greater arsenal of tools we have for better problem solving and decision making. And we've got a wonderful support team behind us. So I'll leave it at that tonight. I apologise for the little glitch in the technology towards the end. If there are any questions at all, please leave them in the comments. I'd only be more than happy to try and answer them. As I said, by no means setting myself up as a guru in this area, but it is an area that I'm very interested in. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives to have a listen to me tonight, and look forward to seeing you not only through Happiness Aid, but on some of the programs through Happiness Co as well. Lots of love to you all, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.